Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers and hope you're enjoying your weekend. Later, State Auditor Mike Harmon on a special examination of the Administrative Office of the Courts. His team found problems and has made some suggested solutions to those. But first, the 2019 Kentucky governor's race is off and running, and the first candidate in the race is familiar to voters. Attorney General Andy Beshear announced this week for the Democratic nomination. His running mate is Jacqueline Coleman, a public school teacher and basketball coach, now serving as an assistant principal. She and Beshear are both here with us this morning, and several stops on their announcement tour have already been coming along the way. Beshear railed against what he calls division in government and bullying, he says, by the incumbent Republican Governor Matt Bevin. Republicans have quickly hit back. Governor Bevin has criticized Beshear and his father, former two-term Governor Steve Beshear, and called them a corrupt family. Beshear is making the case that he understands the state government and its role in the lives of Kentuckians as his campaign is underway. And we welcome the Beshear-Coleman ticket to Kentucky Newsmakers. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Mr. Attorney General, you were eligible to seek another term in your present office, which might have been an easier path to potentially to re-election. Why did you decide this week to step up and run for governor?
Well, I've loved serving as Kentucky's Attorney General. It's allowed me to provide a voice for the voiceless, to fight for struggling families, and I'm proud of our results. We've addressed Kentucky's rape kit backlog. Now every kit has been sent out for testing. We've provided funding to ensure a backlog never happens again, and we even started a cold case unit because everyone deserves justice. We've attacked senior scams, launching the state's first direct text, direct email scam warning system, and returned over $1.6 million to seniors. We've shown up to fight the drug epidemic day in and day out, launching our opioid disposal program, providing over $8 million in treatment to treatment centers, and by suing opioid manufacturers and distributors that must be held accountable. But as I look around state government, I don't see leadership that brings people together to move us forward. Instead of leadership, I do see name-calling and bullying. Instead of trying to build consensus, I see my way or the highway being this administration's approach. And I love Kentucky. I believe our families deserve so much more. You know, I was born and raised right here in Kentucky. I graduated from Henry Clay High School, a Kentucky public school, and Brittany and I chose Kentucky as a place to perform our most important role, which is raising our two kids, Will and Lila. And so I felt this was a step that I had to make for our struggling Kentucky families, so they could have an administration that prioritizes education, that brings a track record of fighting every single day against this drug epidemic, that wants to create good-paying jobs, not just any job, and ultimately wants to restore decency in the governor's office.
Could you have made a difference, though, by you have repeatedly sued the Beshear, the Bevin administration? There's been this, what people refer to as the Bevin-Beshear feud that has gone on since this term began for you and for the governor. Was it an important role for you? Has it been an important role for you to serve in that watchdog over him, as you've seen it?
The Attorney General's office is a critical office that I poured my heart and my soul into. I've loved serving as Kentucky's Attorney General. To be able to fight for the lost, the lonely, and the left behind, to fight for a Kentucky that works for all of us. And I hope that people step up and run for that office that are committed to continuing our work. But our families need so much more.
What do you say to those who say that you have used that office as a stepping stone?
Well, I'd say that the Supreme Court has disagreed with them on the fact that anything that we've done is political. You know, the fact that the governor illegally cut higher education, that was decided by the Supreme Court. Just recently, we won in Franklin Circuit Court against the governor and the legislature's attempt to turn an 11-page sewage bill into a 291-page pension bill and illegally cut the promised retirements of over 200,000 teachers, firefighters, social workers. We've stepped up and done what's right each and every time, and government has to get back to doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, and not just because it's good or bad for any election.
Tell us about your running mate and why you chose her.
Jacqueline Coleman personifies that approach to doing the right thing because it's the right thing. She is a public school teacher, basketball coach, and assistant principal. She is a example and inspiration to young women and men through Lead Kentucky, a nonprofit that she created, and she has been a leader in our battle for public education. Now, she has been amongst the 12,000 teachers that marched on Frankfurt when they tried to cut her family's promised retirement by hiding it in a sewer bill. And she's a rural Kentuckian. She understands and has lived through the challenges we face in jobs, in public education, and in this drug epidemic. She's exactly who we need fighting for us, and she's got a great family.
Candace Coleman, you've never held public office. You're running for a job that potentially could put you literally a heartbeat away from the governorship of Kentucky. What do you want voters to know about how you will approach your job?
Well, I want voters to know that I will fight just as passionately from the Capitol as I have from the classroom for issues that mean so much to so many. When we talk about rural Kentucky, there is really not a family in rural Kentucky that their public school system does not touch. And those issues have always been very important to me. Andy and I share that vision for Kentucky, and we plan to work very hard to move that vision forward.
Do people call you coach on the campaign trail?
They actually do. I think once you're a coach, you're always a coach, and so I still answer to it.
How much of your interest is fueled by education and the concerns about this pension situation as it played out?
You know, I've been an advocate for public education long before the pension battle became a public one, in terms of ensuring that we invest not only in primary and secondary education, but also in higher education. I'm currently a doctoral student at the University of Kentucky, and so I understand that when the cuts come to the universities, those cuts are oftentimes passed on to the families of these students. As for public education, I've worked in schools where there are textbooks held together by duct tape. And I understand what it means when the funding is cut right out from under you and you don't have any instructional resources for your students anymore. I've been in the classroom when that happened, and I can speak to that. This is not just a talking point that someone says because they think that it's the right thing to say. I've lived it, and I understand the importance of valuing our public servants, not calling our teachers names, and ensuring that public education is a budgetary priority.
Attorney General Beshear, how much of a factor will, do you think, the education vote be in this election? You know, and before we hear that it's massive, we had the fact that in the May primary there was a 23% turnout from Kentucky voters. It's hard to say that you know, is a big steamroller.
Well, I think that our vision is a vision of a better Kentucky that people want. Since our announcement, we have had such an outpouring of support, hundreds of people already wanting to volunteer, and one of the major reasons is because we have pledged to prioritize public education. For most Kentuckians, it doesn't matter if they're a Democrat, Republican, rich or poor, their kids all go to the same public school. And public school is really the last bastion for the American dream. That if we truly want every child to have an opportunity at life, you and I both know that some children are born into very difficult circumstances. A public school is where that opportunity is going to happen. So we've pledged that in our administration we will fund every K-12 public school and every public university in a way that will give true opportunity for our children. And we will give teachers a seat at the table. They will be respected. They will never be called names. We will invest in them, and we'll keep our promises to them. That's the least we can do.
Kentucky is a very tight budget situation, despite the fact that the national economy is taking off and doing quite well. And here in Kentucky, the tax system just doesn't collect a lot of revenue. A series of governors have pledged to try to address that, including the incumbent. It really hasn't happened in a comprehensive way.
Well, what we've got to do is lead in the exact way that Jacqueline and I have promised to lead, and that's by bringing people together. And we've pledged to listen even and especially to people who disagree with us, because we believe that Democrats and Republicans still can agree on enough to move this state forward. And that's exactly what we have to do around tax reform. You know, in the most recent session, they came up with a plan and rammed it through without any public comment, and that's not the way that you go about this type of change. It's about bringing everybody to the table because there is enough common ground for us to create the type of support we need for public education. But the other way we're going to support public education is to create a dedicated revenue stream for our pension systems that will free up more dollars from the general fund to go towards education. And we're going to start that through expanded gaming.
How do you see the arrangement between the governor and the lieutenant governor working? And that varies from administration to administration. At this time, the law requires that you run as a ticket, but yet we've had a lot of them have feuded once they got there.
I'm glad we're running as a ticket because Jacqueline and I are a team, and we are going to be a team in everything that we do. Her insight from inside of the classroom is exactly what we need in state government. Her work with youth and encouraging leadership in college students, especially college women, is exactly the type of energy and approach that we need in a new generation of leadership to try to move the state forward in new and different ways. We're going to be in all of this together. And I got to say, we've had the opportunity to get to know each other's families. I couldn't be luckier that she agreed to join this ticket. Her husband, Chris, is amazing. Their kids are wonderful, and they even help take care of mine, which are a little bit younger.
Have you talked about the arrangement? I know it's all politics right now, but have you talked about what would happen in the eventuality that you were serving as lieutenant governor? Things can happen, and his father basically had to be acting governor for some weeks when the Governor Martha Lane Collins in the 1980s swallowed some glass over in England.
Yes.
Remember that?
They've changed that law since then.
Sure, but things
yes.
happen. I mean, you would want someone who could step in.
And she's ready.
And have you discussed that, your arrangements?
Well, so like Andy said, we plan to run as a team. And I think the important thing to know about Andy and me is that we've never been the type of person to sit on the sideline. And that's exactly why we're in this race right now. We believe in fighting for a better Kentucky, and we've always done that actively from every position that we've ever held. And there's no reason that that won't continue. All
right. We're coming back with the Bashir Coleman ticket for Kentucky governor, the first ticket that's in the race for the 2019 race. We're coming back on Kentucky Newsmakers. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. We're delighted you're with us this morning as we are visiting with the Bashir Coleman ticket for governor and lieutenant governor on the Democratic side. The Attorney General of the Commonwealth is running for governor, and he has picked Jacqueline Coleman, a longtime coach and school administrator now, to be his running mate. And let's talk about some more issues. Mr. Bashir, you obviously see your father as a tremendous asset. He overwhelmingly won for governor of the state twice. He had high approval ratings throughout his 8 years in office, but Republicans are moving fast to paint his administration as corrupt. They point to Personnel Secretary Tim Longmire's conviction, further point out that Longmire worked for you briefly when you assumed office. Can you reassure people about the
Sure.
kind of people you surround yourself with?
Absolutely. I think your viewers out there know that even when you set the best example, and even when you set the highest expectations, sometimes people go astray and make the decision to break the law. People have seen that in their businesses and in their communities. What shows your character is how you respond when that happens. We responded with accountability and transparency. On accountability, I appointed a special prosecutor that convicted that individual on state charges because the law is the law, no matter if you work across town or down the hall. On transparency, we answered every single question from the press or the public starting on the very first day that I learned about it. And we produced every single email that person ever wrote. That's what people want to see. They know that sometimes people will make the wrong decision, but how do you react? And Bill, I'd just say contrast that with a number of different things you've seen from the Bevitt administration. For instance, the mansion he's purchased from a state contractor. Now, we still don't have the answers and the transparency there that I think we need.
a series of governors and lawmakers, both Democrat and Republican, the legislature being Democrat and Republican, Republican and Democratic governors, have underfunded the state pensions. And at this point, we owe $40 billion or so that we don't have. This pension law would have addressed some of that. It has been put on hold at this point. Are things in limbo right now? How do we move forward?
Well, first, the pension law wouldn't have helped whatsoever. There's an economist that has looked back on that bill and said it wouldn't save us money. It would cost us $3 billion more. And it unconstitutionally cut the promised retirements of our hardest working public servants. Teachers, firefighters, police officers. So I filed suit to serve as their voice in court. But moving forward, the answer isn't to start by cutting what was promised for decades of service. It's by providing an additional revenue stream dedicated solely to pensions until the system becomes solvent. And the place we've got to start is what every other state around us is doing, which is expanded gaming. In casinos alone right now, Kentuckians spend $1.2 billion of their entertainment dollars. And the tax portion of that goes to Indiana and Missouri and Ohio, and they can use that to pay for their pensions. Now, if we finally take the step here in Kentucky to have the same laws that all our neighbors do, and ultimately we move towards sport betting, which all of our neighbors are going to do, and we look at fantasy sports in the way that we should, which is that it is gambling, then we can create a significant revenue stream that will put billions of dollars over decades into this system. And that's the only way that our retirees and our active public servants aren't going to Frankfurt every 2 years fighting for what they should receive.
So you're for all of the above, I take it.
On expanded gaming, I am for an aggressive approach that would put us on par with the states around us. It's time to stop them from leeching our tax dollars.
Medical marijuana.
I think it's time that we put that on a ballot, whether it is through a constitutional amendment or other means. A lot of people have strong feelings on that. Government is supposed to serve the people, and it's time to let the people decide. This
Medicaid waiver requiring work for benefits, it's been put on hold at this point. Do you support the concept of that able-bodied people work for their benefits?
Well, what most people don't know is that 8 out of 10 people on expanded Medicaid are already working. What the Bevin administration is trying to do here is throw so much paperwork or red tape at them that they don't get it back in time, and even though they're working and able-bodied and qualified, that they will get kicked off of their health care coverage simply by not filling out the forms.
All right. You're ready to go. I guess you're going to Fancy Farm together as a ticket. Is that the case?
We are, and I actually will be joined with many teachers from across the state who look forward to that opportunity as well.
Thanks for coming by. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
And we hope you'll stay with us here on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. We'll be visiting in just a moment with the State Auditor Mike Harmon, an important examination he released this week. We'll be right back. We welcome you back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers, and we're glad you're here. The Kentucky State Auditor's Office often makes headlines when it looks at where taxpayer dollars might be being misspent. The office is in the Kentucky Constitution as an independent watchdog, and this week Auditor Mike Harmon released a special examination that was requested by the Administrative Office of the Courts. That agency runs the court system in all 120 counties. Auditor Harmon's report is tough. It says there is a pervasive lack of accountability. Auditor Mike Harmon is with us. We appreciate you for coming in very much.
Glad to be here this morning, Bill.
What were the findings in this that should get our attention?
Sure. We had 20 findings. And before I get too deep into it, I do want to say I want to thank Justice Minton and AOC Director Laurie Dudgeon for inviting us in, actually inviting us to audit. Now, I will say that I also want to thank them for embracing some of our recommendations, but was really disappointed and saddened that some of the key elements regarding transparency and accountability, some of those in their response anyway, did not actually embrace. But there were 20 findings.
Are you concerned that they'll disregard those recommendations?
Well, I'm concerned because they're very important recommendations. A lot of what has occurred in our 20 findings is due to the culture, the lack of accountability, the structures. So yes, for something like that, especially since this is the first time in I think over 40 years, and never had under the current configuration, have never had an external audit. It's important to do that on a yearly basis. And they had kind of a contention that, well, maybe they should do it, and they probably will, but it'll be up to their decision. And we'd made recommendations, especially since the General Assembly appropriates the majority of their funds. That would be an appropriate place. And they said, no, it's really up to us because we're separate powers, separate but equals. But also, our founders in their infinite wisdom set up a situation to where basically not only are they separate, but there's also checks and balances.
Mr. Auditor, what are some of those 20 things Kentucky taxpayers should know about?
Well, I mean, some of the concerns that we found they did private surplus sales as opposed to doing the surplus sales publicly. Most other agencies, if they have surplus sales, that's how they do it. And in those surplus sales, and oddly enough, they had a 2010 memo from their general counsel, one of their attorneys, indicating that they shouldn't do it this way. They should do it publicly, not privately. They ignored that. And we found that consistently. There were various times where either they didn't have sufficient controls, or what controls and policies they had, perhaps they didn't always follow them. But one of the ones we're talking about, the surplus sales, one of the gentlemen that was one of the executive officers that was over a large majority of the organization, he coordinated those sales, and also the cars we found of the 15 cars that we sampled that were sold within those surplus sales, 10 of them had mileage incorrect in the reporting of their advertisement for that. Some of them were higher, some were lower. But what we found is 2 of the major ones that had a discrepancy were purchased by the same person that was coordinating, the executive officer. One of those was $47,000. I think the other was like $79,000. So that was significant. Some of the other stuff we found throughout, there really wasn't either proper documentation or proper controls regarding private leases. One of the AOC had actually leased some property for a justice, and we got to looking into it. 2 of his sons actually owned the company that he was leasing from, and we looked at the documentation. There was only one other bid included that they rejected. They took the one from the sons. The sons' bid was actually 3 times more than what the bid was for the alternative bid. Now, after we released our report, they're kind of explaining, but when you're doing this, you need to go in and have the documentation to explain, especially if you're going to take something 3 times as much. So they need better policies in place regarding issues like that.
So these rental arrangements can be, and the AOC does a lot of renting, a lot of leasing of office space for the justices and others. You flagged some gift giving as well.
Yes. Well, a lot of what they have in this regards, they didn't have a lot of receipts when it came to using their credit cards or their pro cards. And we had a situation that we found out about that the Chief Justice's wife asked the AOC director, and the AOC director asked one of the people that utilized the pro cards to purchase $410 worth of mint julep cups, personally engraved mint julep cups. The judge sits on a board, an institute board, and they were having their conference here, and he wanted to give those as gifts, which is a nice gesture. But at the same time, it's not proper use of public taxpayer dollars.
Your point was no tax dollars
exactly,
in that regard. As you got into this, again, at their request, do you think there were findings that surprised them?
I think there was probably some that surprised them. I think my biggest concern, like I said, they invited us in,
right?
But and of course we indicated that we were going to go in and we were going to look at their controls and things along that lines. And they certainly this audit in and of itself for the special exam shows that they need an external audit every year. And we would, like I said, we would encourage the General Assembly to go ahead and kind of make that mandatory since they appropriate those funds.
Let's talk a little bit about the Auditor's Office. It is really a watchdog on taxpayers' money. And in recent years, there were findings at Bluegrass Airport. They made changes. There were findings years ago at the Kentucky League of Cities. They made changes.
Since our time, DOCJT, Department of Criminal Justice Training, Kentucky Horse Park.
The untested rape kits found by your predecessor, and I know you followed up on that, and there's been lots of things. I mean, is it that anything you look at, there's going to be something going wrong in Kentucky right now?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. What happens, especially if you don't have proper controls in place, even the most conscientious of individuals can be tempted to try to bend the rules to fit their needs. And we've talked about that, before in regards like some of our county audits. A lot of times we'll have what's known as a segregation of duties, where basically got one person doing everything, taking in the money, making deposits. And if you've got an honest and trustworthy person, generally that's not going to be a problem. But if there's a temptation that occurs, either maybe they have a sick child or they have other needs or something, and there's no one looking over their shoulder, well, then that temptation, they may succumb to it. We all have to be accountable to everybody.
Do you continue to have some concerns about the responsibilities of boards that are appointed and have major responsibilities? Some historically have seen it as a great honor, and they may show up to the meetings, but then there's this kind of pro forma, the way they go through, and without maybe a lot of drilling into the details. Do you find there's been an improvement in that area?
I think for some of the ones that I've seen, there has. Now, from a standpoint, but that's why it's always important for us to take that check. Every year, I'm sure every year you probably go to the doctor and you get a checkup and you make sure that you're healthy. And that's what the auditor's office and others are. We are checks and balances. We want to make sure that we shine the flashlight on it and make sure everybody gets a chance to see where improvements are needed.
If people think something needs to be looked into, what should they do?
Sure. They can call us at, they can reach out to us at auditor.ky.gov. They can call us at 1-800-KY-ALERT. And certainly if they want to read this entire audit, as I said, they can go to auditor.ky.gov. We have that posted on our site, as well as they want to watch our full press conference from yesterday. They can go to our site, go to the Facebook, and watch that particular conference.
And you are seeking re-election next year?
I am seeking re-election.
All right. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill. Really
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. We'll see you bright and early this week on WKYT This Morning. You make it a good week ahead.